رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي قصرت عن رؤيته أبصار الناظرين وعجزت عن نعته أوهام الواصفين. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا أولئك لهم عذاب مهين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is the second and the last Majlis in this series of two Majalis under the discussion of analyzing the Hadith. Last night, under this ayat number 6 from Surah Luqman, I basically scraped the idea of what ilm Hadith is and what role it plays in our tariq, in our history, in our ahkam, in our fiqh, and other areas of our life. So I don't want to go into the depth and the explanation of what we had discussed last night, moving forward from where we had left off. Just a quick recap. We talked about how important this second phenomena after Quran in order to derive the laws, and that is ilm hadith. And we presented some ideas as to the discrepancy that is associated with this ilm and with this science. Of course, I don't intend to go in all areas of ilm hadith in just one lecture, but what we will highlight is the aspect of where the fabrication in ilm hadith occurred. That is our discussion. Because if this is an area which we rely heavily and greatly when it comes to our aqaid and ahkam, and there's discrepancy in it, then we need to make sure that it is correct then. What are the methods of it? How do we go about it? So the first, when did it all start? Number one. Number two, why You find fabrication in ahadith, ilm hadith. And number three, what should we do in order to make sure that we don't fall victim to a fabricated hadith? These will be the three areas that inshallah I hope to cover in tonight's discussion. But just a quick understanding of this ayat which I recited for you last night as well, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ. Amongst the people are those who buy or purchase the vain talk. Vain talk, we talked about how from this ayat, from this word, lahw al-hadith, the concept of prohibition of certain types of music is also derived from this very ayat of Quran. When people ask, where is this in Quran? I usually say to them, if we fall prey to finding out where it says in Quran, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble. Because you can't even pray 5 times a day if you ask where does it say in Quran. Because Quran doesn't say anywhere that you have to pray 5 times a day. Quran doesn't mention anywhere the method of prayer. It doesn't say anywhere how to pray. That means you can just make up your mind and say, well, I'm calling this to be the prayer, and that's how I'm going to be praying. If you go behind that idea of where it says in Quran, then there will be a lot of practices that will be left, incomplete. You don't know all the ahkam of fasting are not found in Quran. When to open the fast, when to break the fast, when to start fasting, those things are vaguely mentioned in Quran. Who can fast, who cannot fast? Yes, that is mentioned, but very vaguely. In kuntum ala safarin, if you are traveling, if you are mareed, or if you're traveling, you don't fast. That's all it says. So fasting would become that very important ibadat of ours in the month of Ramadan, which we all anticipate. It will be very difficult to prove. And on top of that, Hajj will become that much even more difficult. There's this debate, before I get into tonight's actual discussion, that there's this debate as to, we only do the taqleed of Imam al-Masum. I don't know if you've heard this notion, recent past. There's a group that says, taqleed is not wajib, and I'm amongst them. Taqleed is not wajib. Who said taqleed is wajib? Nobody said taqleed is wajib. You have other options. You have multiple options. You study and educate yourself and become a alim, mujtahid, you don't need to do taqleed. You think the current maraji that we have, they're doing taqleed of someone else? No. They're the ones who are doing the taqleed of Imam al-Zamana. Right? You become that much knowledgeable that you can have access to the ulum of Imam al-Zamana. None of them are claiming that we have direct line contact with Imam al-Zamana. No. Nobody says that. Not even the greatest of the maraja or the greatest of the ulama. Nobody claims that. And in fact, there are riwayat, if someone does claim that, they are kazib. They're lying. So, taqleed is not wajib. True. What is wajib? That you need to make sure that you perform the ahkam, the do's and the don'ts. As long as you can take care of that, that's what wajib is. That's all. That's why I'm not doing any taqleed. Because I'm going to do the taqleed of Imam al-Zamana. And only taqleed of Imam al-Masum is permissible. Taqleed of Ghair Masum is not permissible. This notion has picked up a great deal in the recent past. And it all has to do to go out and establish a front against the institution of marja'iyyat. And therefore, they bring this idea. Right away, people will be, accepting it, saying, yes, of course. When you have two options, Imam al-Masum, Ghair Masum, who are you going to do the taqleed of? You're going to do taqleed of Imam al-Masum. You're not going to do the taqleed of Ghair Masum. Yeah, if the Imam al-Masum was present, in his absence, what we're speaking of, this concept, they say, well, this concept is recent. No, you just learn about it. Ask your parents that in their time, in the 60s and the 70s, they were the maraji whose taqleed was used to be done. If your grandparents are alive, ask them. In the 50s and the 40s, there was another set of maraji whose taqleed used to be done. If your great-great-grandparents are alive, ask them. In the 30s and the 40s, there were some maraji, their taqleed used to be done. This is a concept that began from the ghaibat of 12th Imam. That's where it all started. The 11th Imam prepared the path for people to go out and follow the hadithina, and gave so specific instructions and accolades of who will be the ulama that you should follow. Specific words are mentioned. Ayat number 122 of Surah Tawbah and hadith from our 11th Imam. So this notion that we only do the taqleed of Ma'soom is in the false pretext. It's not truly, giving you the right picture. He said, no, I know how to pray. Who over here doesn't know how to pray? I know how to fast. Oh, no, they don't tell you that I learned how to pray from Quran or Hadith. I learned how to pray from this manual. Okay, fine. I learned it from my Sunday school. My Sunday school teacher taught me. I learned how to fast through my Sunday school. All the other stuff that Islam demands, the do's and the don'ts, I learned it from my teachers. So I don't need to do taqleed. Fair enough. When you go to Hajj, you're going to bring your teacher along with you? When you're doing a tawaf of Kaaba, and you're not sure of the kafara of certain things that you have done, what are you going to do at that time? Are you going to go ahead and call your teacher, Sunday school teacher, help me out? And when you commit something in the state of ihram, what are you going to start pulling it through Quran, looking through ayat of Quran and see if you can find the masala in Quran? Or are you going to bring all the books of ahadith, authentic? We talked about last night, the authentic and the unauthentic. You're going to bring all the books of ahadith with you, and you're going to go through, flipping through the pages. What did Imam say, Imam al-Masoom, whose taqleed we are doing, what did Imam al-Masoom say about this particular masala? And at that time, you're going to be remembering, I should have just easily followed one of the living marja, followed his book of Masail on Hajj, and that would have been called taqleed. The moment you go on this Hajj, why you're not worried about doing taqleed in namaz? Because namaz is easy. Even if you mess up in namaz, you can repeat it. Fasting is easy. Even if you mess up in fast, you can repeat it. Hajj is not easy. On top of that, you're spending 15 grand. You want to make sure that everything is done properly. Otherwise, loss of money and the ibadah is also incomplete. Then they realize there's the need of marjaiyat. Up until they don't go to Hajj, they say, we don't really need a marja. We don't need to do taqleed. True, I'm with you. You don't need to do taqleed. Taqleed is not wajib. But when it's not wajib, there's an alternative that you have to do. That is, you yourself become a mujtahid, so you don't have to follow anyone else. But when you don't have the time, not everybody has that sort of time to go ahead and become so, immensely into the ulum ad-din, to be able to grasp and understand all the ulum and the sciences of deen. Then the easiest way is to just follow someone who has done expertly that for you. And kind of like the example that we give in our lives. You have a few physicians, you go out and follow the one who is the expert, or the one who you're able to, for example, afford. You follow in other areas of life as well. This is just a simple, illogical issue. I've mentioned it many times, and you have, mashallah, Rizwan Ali, who has spoken about this as well, a great deal, the importance of this concept that where there's a front that is being created. And the khiyanat, it's so easy these days. You get these posts through social media. One push a button and everybody has it. There's this post that is circulating. If you didn't receive it, good. If you have, then you're in that circle. Which says a hadith from our sixth Imam, true, hadith is from sixth Imam. I'm sure many of you don't even bother looking at the reference that has been provided. If there's a reference provided underneath the hadith that has been forwarded to you, I don't know how many of you go out and actually find that reference. Although it's quite easy these days. You have this AI, ChatGPT, you just type it in there. For example, Tahzeeb al-Ahkam, volume 5, from hadith number 38, it will go ahead and give you the hadith. That's all you need. You get this post, it says this book, you write the name of the book, you put the page number, it will actually search through different volumes and different prints of the same book and tell you that in this print, on this page, it says this riwayat, but in another print, this riwayat is there. There's a possibility. 5 different printers printed this book. Someone had this hadith on page 81, another one had this hadith on page 90, and so on and so forth. Just like you find in Nahj al-Balagha, can you ever find the actual khutbah that is given to you? Khutbah may not be a problem, but the short sayings, when it says short saying number 290, you look up 290, well, it's not there. Well, it's probably 294 then. It's probably 300 then. Obviously they're off by 10 in all of these books. So you have this tool which is available. But how many go out and actually go do this search? Very few. Very few. So there's this post that is going around that says, Imam said, احذروا أولادكم من المرجعة قبل أن يسبقكم. Protect, I'll just try to protect your children, بادروا أولادكم, protect your children from murji'ah before they go ahead and mislead your children. As far as our riwayat, teach your children, that's the riwayat. بادروا أولادكم بالحديث. Imam said, teach your children about our hadith. Before murji'ah go ahead and mislead them, this is the hadith. So Imam said this. You know what the translator did? Khiyanat. He translated it like this. Protect your children from not murji'ah, maraje. Before, protect your children from the maraje, teach them our ahadith before they're misled by them. That's the translation that is going around. Hadith from 6th Imam. 6th Imam? Why is 6th Imam talking about the marji'iyyat? The concept started in the time of 11th Imam, number one. This is something which we will discuss in Ilm Hadith that comes about. The khiyanat that is being done. What is murji'ah? Murji'ah was a group in the time of 6th Imam, misleading people openly. So Imam, in order to stop people from following the murji'ah, Imam said this. But the Khain translated the word murji'ah as baraja. And this post is now circulating. People are looking at it and then they are reposting it to go ahead and further their point. You know how in social media nowadays, our president goes ahead and posts anything or everything that he gets, thinking that is true in nature. And then, of course, later on, the press secretary has to make up all these lies about it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. So the first area, because I won't be able to finish, last night I went over my time. First area is when did Ja'al Hadith start? So we're talking about creation of Hadith and fabricating Hadith. Ja'al Hadith is the concept. When did it start? There are four aqwal. First call says that it started in the time of Rasulullah. As early as the time of Rasulullah. People didn't even wait for Rasulullah to leave this world. That they started to do what? They started fabricating hadith. So there's a story that is mentioned. A man went to house of a person, knocked on his door, went inside and he said, I want to marry your daughter. The man said, what do you do? He said, well, he mentioned something. Where are you from? He mentioned something. He said, well, I don't see you fit for my daughter, so I'm going to have to say no. The man left. He said he went back in the evening. And now this time when he knocked on the door, he said, I'm sent by Rasulullah. Rasulullah sent me and he said, if you don't marry your daughter to me, then there will be great adab for you. The man got scared. Now, of course, there's no hotline, there's no phone that he can call Rasulullah and ask and confirm this. So he gave his daughter in marriage to that man. Afraid of adab ukhravi and the wrath and disappointment from Rasulullah. Because there are riwayat which mention that if there's a suitable match that comes for your daughter, and if you deny it, then there will be, chaos in the world. There will be fitna. The word fitna is used. If you deny a suitable match for your daughter. So the man probably had heard something similar. He thought this is same. Rasulullah is giving a direct order. He went ahead and gave his daughter into marriage. Later on, after weeks or so, he finally got in touch with Rasulullah. He came to see him and he said, Rasulullah, while I respect and have, you're the prophet, you're all this, but I was really hurt when you ordered that man to be married to my daughter. Rasulullah said, I did not order such a thing. And then Rasulullah said these words. He says, "Man kadhiba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa'u maq'adahu fil nar." Whoever associates a lie unto me, then their final abode is Jahannam. That is why when you fast and you associate a lie to Rasulullah, your fast is broken. This became a concept. So as early as the time of Rasulullah, we see fabrication of hadith. It started, Imam mentioned that. Similarly, the second time when this fabrication of hadith actually started was in the time of third Khalifa, Uthman ibn Affan. What happened was, in his time, when Banu Umayyah are in power, because he belongs to the Umayyads, Umayyad started from the time of Uthman. When he came into power, a lot of ahadith were started to generate in order to praise the first two caliphs, and then to also praise Uthman as well, in order to legitimize their position. You'd question, why didn't this, fabrication of hadith start from the first and the second Khalifa's time, right? That is a natural question that should come to your mind. Not only that there were no fabrication of hadith in the time of first and the second Khalifa, in fact, there was prohibition to narrate hadith in the time of first and second Khalifa. When the first Khalifa came into power, what did he say? First ban, not first in a sense, first, top of the list. One of the bans and the prohibitions that went into effect in his time, when Trump comes into power, this goes into, as a legislative order, or he signs that into a bill or whatever. One of the things that went into was to prohibition of narrating hadith from Rasulullah. You think about it, why? Now, our brothers of Ahlul Sunnah, they give you a perfect example of that. They say, well, the first Khalifa and the second Khalifa, they feared that people will leave Quran and they will go after the hadith. That's their justification. Or they will mix the ayat of Quran with the hadith. Why would that happen? You have a Quran which is left by Rasulullah between the two jild, the covers. It's ready, prepared. People know this is Quran. How are they going to go ahead and mix the words of Rasulullah with that? So these sort of, concepts were given. Another thing, why did it start? Because people knew the first and the second Khalifa. If the fabrication of hadith began praising them, people already know them. We know you. You didn't have these merits. You didn't have these fadail. Rasulullah never said anything like this about you in our presence. How is he going to go ahead and concoct something like this? So, for example, there are hadiths that are praising the first and the second Khalifa. If that was done in the time of the first Khalifa, then people who are with them, they say, we've never saw Rasulullah said this about you. So, there was never a fabrication of hadith in the time of the first and the second Khalifa. It actually started in the time of third Khalifa. If anything, in the time of first and second Khalifa, it was prohibition of narrating the hadith of Rasulullah. What is the only reason that comes to your mind? Why would they go ahead and prohibit? Primarily because all of the fadail of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam that were mentioned by Rasulullah, people will start questioning that if Ahlul Bayt are so ba-fadilat, what is it that you're doing on the minbar of Rasulullah? That was the reason. So therefore, it started in the time of third Khalifa. Number three, people say it actually really picked up in the time of Muawiyah after the Shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. From 41st after Hijrah, there was this team that was developed, and I'll give you the names of the people, hired by Muawiyah to go ahead and, fabricate a hadith in praise of the Umayyads as well as the Khulafa. And then lastly, it is mentioned that it started towards the end of the first century, in the year 80 and 90, in the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Why? Because Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is someone from the Abbasids, or from the Umayyads, who actually stopped the prohibition of narrating hadith. He came in power, he said that ban that was placed by the first Khalifa, I'm removing it. From now on, anyone and everyone can go ahead and narrate hadith if they want to. No, you're removing the prohibition. All those people who saw Rasulullah dead, they're gone. They're not there anymore. You don't have the first and the primary source anymore. You have the secondary source. Those who saw the companions of the Prophet. They heard something from the companions of the Prophet. So there's this distance. And therefore, hence the fabrication of hadith begins. So that's number one. When did it start? Time of Rasulullah, time of third Khalifa, time of Muawiyah, and towards the end of the first century in the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Number two, our discussion is as to what are some of the reasons behind fabricating a hadith. Why this was introduced to begin with. Why would someone do that? You know, people of all associating lies with Rasulullah. You and I are so careful when we quote someone. Even if that person is not a masoom, we're so careful in quoting. You want to quote the great scholars. You want to quote, for example, I don't know, the Islamic scholars. You want to quote non-Muslim scholars. You want to quote the visionaries of the past. You want to quote Martin Luther King. You're careful about it. You want to quote Mahatma Gandhi. You're careful about it. You want to quote Mark Twain. You're careful about it. You want to go ahead and say something that they didn't say, because this is in an age that we live in. People can easily go ahead and refute. No, they didn't say this ever. What was the reason, muharrik, behind fabricating hadith? Number one, siyasi, political reason. They wanted to legitimize their political arena that they are justified in ruling the Muslim Ummah. So for political reasons, this came about. For example, Suyuti and Ibn Jawzi, these are the Ahl Sunnat ulama, they say many of the ahadith that are narrated in praise of the Khulafa are all fabricated. I'll give you two examples of that. Just the tone of it, you guys, just by attending Majilis, have understood the concept of dirayat, which we will get to what is dirayat, which means the hadith makes no sense. You understand, just by attending Majlis that much, that this hadith doesn't make any sense. And I'll narrate a couple for you. For example, the hadith says, and you'll understand the hadith in parallel to that they copied off and then they fabricated this one. Just me by reciting this hadith for you, many of you will be able to get to that, inshallah. Hadith says this, Inna Abu Bakr wa Umar, Ya Abu Bakr wa Umar, Sayyada Kuhul Ahl al-Jannah. Let me translate for those who didn't understand. Majority did understand. That indeed, Abu Bakr and Umar are the leaders of the elderly in paradise. What hadith comes to your mind that they copied off? Inna al-Hasan wal-Husayn, Sayyida Shabab Ahl al-Jannah. That indeed Hasan and Hussein are the leaders of the youth of paradise. Similar concept, just change the words, change the people, and change Shabab to Kuhul. That Hasan and Hussein, because they were youth, they are the leaders of the youth of paradise. As if Hasan and Hussein were never old enough to go beyond the youth years. You know, Imam Hussein was 57 years old at the time of his Shahadat. Imam Hassan was close to 50 years old at the time of his Shahadat. 46, 47. So they were not youth when they left this world. But Rasulullah saying that Inna al-Hasan wal Hussein Sayyid al-Shawr al-Jannat, because there aren't elderly in the Qiyamah or in Jannat. Don't be fearful, those who are elderly. You'll become young. And you'll be raised and you'll be brought into Jannat, inshallah, at Shabab. So there's no fatigue. There's no pain of old age. Back is hurting, legs are hurting, all of that pain, they'll be gone. You'll be Shabab. Just like you see young people running back and forth. I wish I could run like this. Not anymore. Takes me time to get up from my bed to go to the, for example, washroom. But look at the young kids. So the hadith is not fabricated. Or for example, another hadith which you will be able to understand, it says, إِنَّ مَثَلَ أَبِي بَكْرٍ وَعُمَرٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ كَمَثَلِ جِبْرَائِيلَ وَمِيكَائِيل فِي السَّمَاءِ. The example of first Khalifa and the second Khalifa on this earth is like the example of Jibreel and Mikael in the heavens. Right away, with your understanding of attending Majilis, without any prejudice, you say, well, Jibreel and Mikael are masoom. How can you go ahead and compare Ghair Masoom, who prostrated in front of idols before embracing Islam, to be compared with Jibreel and Mikael? All these things go into effect when you go ahead and study hadith. But this was done primarily what? To go ahead and further the agenda of their siyasat and so on and so forth. Imam al-Nasai, you really got to give credit where you have to. One of the authors of Sihah Sitta, 6 authentic books of Ahl Sunnah, one of them is written by Imam al-Nasai. He went to Sham and he saw a terrible state of people cursing Ahl Bayt and Amir al-Mu'mineen in particular. And he decided to write a book called Khasa'isu Amir al-Mu'mineen, which is available in English, I think translated by Tahir Qutbuddin in English, and of course Urdu translations have been done as well. Phenomenal book. All the merits and the fadail through the Sunni sources, written by a Sunni scholar, Imam al-Nasai, who's respected amongst the Ahl Sunnah. He was asked, why didn't you write anything about Amir al-Sham? He said, I searched and I couldn't find any hadith in the fadail of Amir al-Sham. I only found one hadith from Rasulullah about Muawiyah, and that was in condemnation. When Rasulullah called him, bring Muawiyah to me, they said he was eating. Rasulullah said, okay. After a while, he said, send someone to go out and get Muawiyah. He said, he's still eating. He said, may Allah never satiate him. May he never be filled. And that's the only hadith that I found. I couldn't find anything in merits of Muawiyah. The one for whom they'll go ahead and say, Khalil Mu'mineen, Katib Wahi, and all these merits. If that existed, Imam al-Nasai would have narrated it. Imam al-Nasai didn't find any of this. That means what? These are all concocted. These are all fabricated that came later on. If Imam al-Nasai is not finding these ahadith about Muawiyah, then where are you coming from? So here where we see the reason why this was to go ahead and further their political agenda. Number 2, firqawariyat. To bring about a disturbance in the different firaq and the madhahib that existed at that time. So you have the 4 imams in Ahl Sunnah, right? Those who follow Imam Abu Hanifa, Hanafi, Imam Malik, Maliki, Imam Shafi'i, and Hanbali. These are 4 Aimma of Ahl Sunnah. They started narrating or fabricating hadith to lower the status of the other. For example, the hadith that was narrated by the Abu Hanifa's followers was this, that there's no one more problematic, adar, the word adar, zarar, from zarar, the word adar. There's no one more harmful than Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. Rasulullah said this. Rasulullah said this. If I was to say Rasulullah, how can Rasulullah said this? Imam al-Shafi'i comes when? 150 years after Rasulullah. How can Rasulullah say this about Imam al-Shafi'i? The Shafi'i madhab then, returning the favor by saying there's no one more other than Abu Hanifa, which is probably correct. But how can Rasulullah say something like this? Then in order to defend it, the Hanafi came out with the hadith by saying that Abu Hanifa huwa siraj ummati. Rasulullah said this, that Abu Hanifa is like the lamp of my ummat. Qala Rasulullah. Of course, you and I can all realize Imam Abu Hanifa was born in the year 80 after Hijrah. Rasulullah left this world in 11 after Hijrah. 70 years of gap between them. How can Rasulullah go ahead and say something about someone who came 70 years later? And that too, غير معصوم, and that to go ahead and predict and call them to be siraj of ummat. So this was something done to firqawariyat. The reason was ikhtilaf between their aqaid and their nazariyat. There are a lot of differences that we have as far as the theology is concerned. In Kalam, if the book of Allah is Qadim or Hudud or Hadith or Jabr and Tafweez, all of these ahkam that are related to Ilm Kalam, there's so much difference that is found there. Then for the personal gains of these Abbasid rulers, for example, regarding Harun al-Rashid, Harun al-Rashid was fond of pigeons. He had pigeons, and he used to play with pigeons. Some people came to see him, and they saw that Khalifatul Muslimin is Kabutarbaz. He's playing with the pigeons. As I'm sure many people back home, they have pigeons and they keep them, and this is their habit. It seemed very mayud to those who were visiting that Khalifatul Muslimin, who is the owner, who's the, has the control over the entire Muslim Ummah from east to west, is playing with pigeons? One of the people who were sitting in the crowd, he said, قال Rasulullah had said, there are three competitions which are permissible. One regarding camels, number two regarding horses, and number three regarding pigeons. So right away, this hadith was concocted, made up, fabricated, so that Harun al-Rashid doesn't look bad. So Rasulullah said this, yes. Rasulullah said three types of musabiqat are permissible. One that has to do with camel, number two that has to do with horses, number three with pigeons. One of the advisors of Harun after people left said, you should go ahead and sacrifice this pigeon. Because the hadith is definitely fabricated. Rasulullah never says something like this. For example, when Abu Safa, he sat on the minbar wearing a belt and the shoes made of leather. Someone looked at him and he said, Minbar of Rasul, and the Khatib of Minbar of Rasul is wearing a belt and shoes made of leather. Right away, someone got up and said, Qala fulan, Ra'aytu Rasulullah. I saw Rasulullah with my own eyes. The Rasulullah used to sit on the minbar with a belt and the shoes on. Right away, what Abu Safa had done was legitimized. So these hadiths exist, brothers and sisters. These are not something which are being made up. And then lastly, which has to do with you and I. So these first three have to do with our brothers. The fourth one has to do with us. Our brothers did not fall in this category much. So much so that you and I, our Shia, fell into this category. And that is the category of ghulu and nusariyat in hadith. You know all the ghulu that came about, and the nusariyat that came about, the nusari and the wujud of nusari and considering Amir al-Mu'mineen to be Ali, to be Allah, and associating uluhiyyat to Aimma Athar, that is only in Shia madhab. In fact, if nusariyat is alive, it's only alive in the Shia poetry. There's no wujud khariji of nusari outside. If anyone has kept nusari alive, it's our poetry. Let me be very blunt about it. We are the ones in our poetry, in our shairi, go to the length to go ahead and praise Aimma Athar, where we bring them to word all the way to the extent where they are what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, na'udhu billah. Imam himself said, Nazza'uni, remove us, keep us away from uluhiyat. Say whatever you want about it afterwards. But keep us away from uluhiyat. We're not ilah, we're not Rabb, we're not Khuda. That is the area where we find our madhab went into the trouble. There are many ayat of Quran that requires ta'wil. So there's a ta'wil of an ayat of Quran. What is the ta'wil of ayat of Quran? There's a tafsir of Quranic ayat, and then there's a ta'wil of Quranic ayat. Tafsir is the shan al-nuzul, why this ayat was revealed. Ta'wil is you go ahead and implement this ayat to the other events that happen in the history. Well, this happened because look, there's an ayat in the Quran. We do that all the time. So for example, there's an ayat of Quran that says, in asbaha ma'ukum ghawra, faman ya'atikum bima'in ma'in. If your water was to drown and merge into the land and the earth, who is going to bring the water out of it? There's a ta'wil of this ayat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not talking about literally water, because today you and I have the machines to pull the water out of the ground, right? Very simple machine to pump the water out of the ground. This ayat is not talking about having pumps. This ayat is saying, in asbaha imamukum ghawra. When your imam is hidden, who is going to bring your imam out? So there's nothing wrong with this ta'wil of this ayat. This ayat is not talking about water literally. This ayat is actually in kinaya, talking about your imam, imam madhab ahl tashayyo, the 12th imam in particular, who will go into hiding. Who will bring him out again? It is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salawat biji Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Or for example, the ayat of Surah Naba, Amma yatasa'alun anil naba'il azim. Although the discussion on hand is about Qayamat, they are questioning about something which is Naba'i Azim, great news. So all they're also, Naba'i Azim is the Zat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. Why? Because they are quarreling and they are arguing about Ali ibn Abi Talib, that who is the first Khalifa. You know, this art is so, and I'll bring you to close. I'll get to the third point. That the ulama had to do hard work to be able to bring the right ahadith out and utilize them properly. Because many of the ahadith were said in a sense where there was a taqiyya involved in it. The concept of taqiyya. With this hadith was said by Imam Masum in the state of taqiyya. Imam said to Ali ibn Yaqeen, "O Ali ibn Yaqeen, go ahead and do the wudu like the Ahl Sunnah do. Go ahead and pray with your hands folded like the Ahl Sunnah do." Seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim is giving us the permission to pray like the Ahl Sunnah. Do we take this hadith literally? No, this was a specific example to Ali ibn Yaqeen, who was under trouble, under the watch of Harun al-Rashid, and people were complaining that Ali ibn Yaqeen is an agent of Imam Kazim. In order to protect Ali ibn Yaqeen, Imam Kazim said to him, from now on, until we tell you, you're going to go into taqiyya. You're going to pray like the Sunnis do. They started spying on him, they saw him praying like the Sunnis. So, well, he's not a follower of Imam Kazim. If he was, he would be praying like Imam. So these ahadith are under taqiyya. Don't take them literally. Oh, Imam Kazim said we can pray like the Sunnis. So I'm going to go ahead and fold my hand whenever next time I go to the Sunni masjid. No, your namaz will be batal. The next time I go to Makkah and Medina, I'm going to fold my hand because I'm fearful. That's not the story you're fearful. But your namaz will be batal. Go pray in your hotel if you're fearful of praying in the masjid with your hands open, for example. There's no taqiyya in this regard today. So many ahadith were said and mentioned in the form of taqiyya, and therefore you cannot take them as merits directly. So this was also another concept that was involved in it. Lastly, because I could not do justice to the third concept, which is the ghulu in our ahadith, and there's no time remaining to go into that, but you get the gist. You know how much ghulu that has come in, and Ghaliyan and the Nusayri have come in into our ulum-e-din. You know, one more example maybe will justify it. There's an ayat of Quran which says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Iblis, "Ma mana'aka an tasjuda ma khalaqtu bi yadayya." Oh Iblis, what stopped you from doing sajda to that which I created with my both hands? Which I created with my both hands. Now our Zakir will say, Allah does not have body parts. So these two hands, and Ali is Yadullah. So you put two and two together, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to Iblis, what stopped you from worshipping that Ali created with his hands? That's the ta'wil. That is commonly done from the minbar. And if I had done this from a minbar where there would be people doing wahwa, they would have done a lot of wahwa over this. This would have been a great nukta to get a lot of wahwa out of you. But in the process, what have I done? I have done what Rasulullah stopped. Man kadhiba alayya. Whoever muta'ammidan, knowingly associates a lie. Have you ever heard a zakir come and say something and he said, I don't know what you're thinking about, but that's not what I mean. They'll take you to that valley all the way to that extent where your mind is already thinking. And say, well, I didn't take you there. I don't know what you're thinking. I didn't mean to say that. They'll take you to the level of ghulu, the threshold of it, and then they'll back out just to protect themselves. This ayat, when it says, what stopped you from worshipping that which I created with my both hands, and Ali is Yadullah, therefore what happened? Ali created Adam alayhi salam. Allah is using the word yadayya metaphorically. What does the word yad refers to in Quran? Power. When you say, unke haath mein qudrat hai, unke haath mein hukumat hai. Trump ke haath mein hukumat hai. Does that really mean he is in his hands? No, it shows the power. Qudrat, hand refers to power. Allah says, I created Adam with my hands. Allah doesn't have hands. In fact, Allah doesn't even need to do this act. He thinks about it. His irada right away translates into creation of Hazrat Adam alayhi salatu wasalam. That's all it is. He doesn't even have to say, kun fa yakun. It's just for us to understand this. So we got to be very careful in this regard. And lastly, how do we differentiate between the hadiths? Number one, go ahead and, look at the hadiths with the ayat of Quran. If it's fitting with the ayat of Quran, If it's in line with the ayat of Quran, then take it. If it's against the ayat of Quran, then of course the Rawaya says, فَضْرِبُوا إِلَى الْجِدَارِ, literally throw it against the wall. So there's a concept in Ahl Sunnah that we will get to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, right? This concept is against the ayat of Quran. Allah says in this ayat of Surah An'am 103, He says, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدركه الأبصار. يدرك الأبصار. No basar can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if there's a rewayah that says that we will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you go ahead and look at the ayat of Quran. Ayat of Quran says, no, you cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَضْرِبُوا إِلَى الْجِدَارِ, throw it against the wall. So you go ahead and compare the ahadith associated with Amma Yathar to the ayat of Quran. If they don't make sense, throw it against the wall. Number two, look at the sunnah of Rasulullah. And see that what kind of ahadith Rasulullah has said. Along with it, if this sounds far-fetched and judgmental, then throw it against the wall. Similarly, tarihi lihasa, you look at if this is something even possible, tarihi value of it. There was, for example, a riwayat that was talking about Ali ibn Mahziyar seeing Imam Zamana. He didn't even exist in the time of Imam Zamana. He existed in the time of earlier Imams. So when there's a hadith that is talking about someone who didn't exist in the time of Rasulullah, like the hadith that Rasulullah said about Abu Hanifa, you say, well, that cannot be true. Why? Because that man didn't even exist in the time of Rasulullah. And then lastly, you look at the hadith according to your aql salim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you this aql. 2 plus 2 is not 5. If the hadith is telling you 2 plus 2 is 5, فَضْرِبُوا إِلَى الْجِدَارِ, throw it against the wall. You know, these are hadiths, brothers and sisters. I know I've taken too much of your time. It's a great science which had to be very, particularly, specifically studied, and there were hadiths that had to be scrutinized. A man came in front of Khalifa who asked him, who is Afdal, Ali or Abu Bakr? Now he knows the Khalifa Abbasi wants to hear the name of Abu Bakr. He can't say Ali, but if he doesn't say Ali, then he is going to put his life in jeopardy. So what did he say? He said, Man kana bintuhu fi baytihi. Who's Afdal? The one whose daughter was in his house. So with this, 2 birds with 1 stone. Man kana bintuhu fi baytihi. Whose daughter was in his house. The man thought he was referring to Abu Bakr because Abu Bakr's daughter was in the house of Rasulullah. But what he really meant to say was, Man kana bintuhu fi baytihi. It was the daughter of Rasulullah who was in the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So he got away with it. And similar such ahadith which people had to really go out of the way to be smart about it. And all this concept. So this deen did not reach us easily. There were great sacrifices that were given. Ma'asumin gave sacrifices. Imam ﷺ on this journey of his did not come to this concept easily. He gave a great deal of sacrifice. And then when Imam gave his life, it was Bibi Zainab who carried on the lantern. This is where we see that the Ayyam-e-Azha, when they're coming to an end, Ahl Haram have left Sham. They performed the Majilis in Sham. When Bibi Zainab was asked, she said, we want to go ahead and bid farewell to our loved ones. A Majlis was organized. Bibi Zainab sat, all the ladies sat, and the heads of Shuhada were brought in one by one. As the heads of Shuhada, जैसे जैसे सरों को लाया जा रहा था, एक एक बीबी आगे बढ़ती थी, अपने शहीद के सर को अपनी आगोश में ले लेती थी. हुसैन के सर को ज़ैनब ने आगोश में लिया, ज़ैनब ने अब्बास के सर को आगोश में लिया, लैला ने अली अकबर के सर को आगोश में लिया, रबाब ने अली असगर के सर को हाथ में लिया, या मसलन उम्मे फरवा ने कासिम के सर को अपने हाथ में लिया. लेकिन 2 ऐसे सर थे कि जिनको किसी ने हाथ न लगाया, शामी औरतों से भी रहा न गया. कहा ये 2 बच्चे लावारिस हैं, क्या इनकी मां नहीं है, कि इनका कोई पूछने वाला नहीं है. और जनाब ज़ैनब ने किस तरीके से दिल पे हाथ रखा होगा और कहा होगा नहीं इनकी दुखियारी मां जिंदा है, मगर कैसे इन पे गिरिया करे. अरे मैं मां को क्या मुंह दिखाऊंगी कि उनका फर्जंद रसूल का नवासा उसका सर रखा रहा, कोई गिरिया करने वाला न था, और ज़ैनब अपने बच्चों पे गिरिया कर रही थी. अजरुकुम अल्लाह. ये काफिला शाम से चला है और ये काफिला पहुंचता है करबला के रास्ते مدینہ. لیکن جب کربلا سے گزرے نا, بیویوں نے آخری پرسہ دیا. جب تمام بیویاں آخری پرسہ دے چکی, زینب نے دوبارہ تیار کیا قافلے کو. قافلہ سالار ہے زینب کہ مدینہ جانا ہے, سب تیار تھے. ایک بیوی نظر نہ آئی, رباب تھی جو نظر نہ آئے. آتی ہے رباب کے پاس جو حسین کی قبر پہ بیٹھی تھی. اے بھابی رباب, ابھی آپ نے سلام مسیح نے سنا. اے بھابی رباب چلیے, وقت پوچھ ہے, آپ کے بغیر قافلہ آگے نہ بڑھے گا. رباب نے کس طریقے سے سمجھایا ہوگا, زینب میری چہی تھی زندان شام میں رہ گئی, میری نشانی زندان شام میں رہ گئی. میرا فرزند شش ماہالی ازور یہاں پہ سو رہا ہے اور میرا سہاگ بھی یہاں پہ ہے. ارے میں مدینہ جا کے کیا کروں گی؟ اجرکم اللہ, انا للہ و انا الیہ راجعون. ماتم حسین.
واپس حسین بولا سے نہ سکے, واپس حسین کر بولا سے نہ سکے. سر کو کٹا کے دین نبی کا بچا سکے, سر کو کٹا کے دین نبی کا بچا سکے. وہ کربلا وہ حرملا کے تیر کی تیری کے علماء, وہ حرملا کے تیر کی تیری کے علماء. اصغر کا حوصلہ تھا کہ وہ مسکرا سکے, اصغر کا حوصلہ تھا کہ وہ مسکرا سکے. واپس حسین کربلا سے نہ آ سکے, واپس حسین کربلا سے نہ آ سکے. سر کو کٹا کے دین نبی کا بچا سکے, سر کو کٹا کے دین نبی کا بچا سکے. یا حسین 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 یا حسین. اماں غریب ہوں میں, اماں غریب ہوں میں, اماں غریب ہوں میں, اماں غریب ہوں میں, اماں غریب ہوں میں,